From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Vice President Kamala Harris makes her own selection for VP, naming two-term Minnesota Governor Tim Walz to the 2024 Democratic ticket, passing over less progressive options, including Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro. What do we know about Governor Walz, and is that whooshing sound you're hearing a big sigh of relief from Donald Trump's campaign headquarters? Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnist Kim Strassel and editorial board member Monet Ukwe-Barua. On Tuesday, Kamala Harris announced her new running mate in an Instagram post saying, "I'm proud to announce that I've asked Walz for governor to be my running mate. One of the things that stood out to me about Tim is how his convictions on fighting for middle-class families run deep. It's personal," she said, before going into some of his biography. Kamala Harris is expected to take the stage with Tim Walz at a rally in Philadelphia later today. But while we wait for that, let's play a couple clips that give a sense of Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota. These are from Fox 9 in Minneapolis.
I want to see that person, first and foremost, who is compatible with whatever the vice president wants. Whatever she wants is it in this moment. And just to be candid, to put a ticket together that wins in November and continues to implement the policies that we've seen out of this administration, investing in children, taking climate change seriously, working as true partners with states, because I've seen what happens when you have a president who doesn't value partnerships and one who does. And this is all whatever makes soon-to-be President Harris the most effective candidate and most effective president. That's what they need to see. And that will be up to her, whatever she needs. I will just say this. I don't know if every high school geography teacher expects to be in this position at some point, but it is very strange to be running on my treadmill and have people talking about the things that are there, and I scream back, "This guy is too old. I'm running my butt off here on the treadmill." So no, just going along.
Kim, what do we know about Tim Walz, and what do you make of him as a vice presidential contender? I grant that he has a bit of Midwestern charm there.
Well, here's what we know about his biography. He's been in politics quite a long time. I mean, he did have a history. He was in the Army National Guard. He was a high school social studies teacher, but he was elected in Minnesota in a House district in 2006. He served 5 terms in U.S. Congress. And then in 2018, he was elected the governor of Minnesota. He was reelected in 2022. And we know why most likely Kamala chose him, in that, I mean, Minnesota isn't exactly a swing state, although it's a place where the Trump team would like to play. But more, he does have that folksy, kind of down-to-earth, Midwesterner, avuncular aspect about him. And that's very much what they're going to push. They're going to say he's a person that can identify with the middle class, the working class. He's got a few things going for him in that way. Like I said, he's got his history in the National Guard. He was elected from a more conservative district when he first got into Congress. He can say that at one point in his life, he had an NRA endorsement. That hasn't been with him for a while. He's a gun owner. He's a hunter, so this is their attempt to kind of make their pitch to the working class and blue collar voters. But what we also know is that he has presided over an incredibly progressive administration that puts him entirely in camp with the progressive movement right now. You can see that in what he's spent and the programs he's erected in Minnesota. He really has been very busily turning Minnesota into the California of the Midwest. And of course, that in the end was the main reason he was acceptable to the progressive left that were very much lobbying the Kamala campaign on who they should choose.
Monet, that's sort of my read as well. Let's listen to a clip of some of the jockeying today about where exactly Tim Walz stands on the political spectrum. This is former Speaker Nancy Pelosi on NBC.
He has been a champion, a successful member of Congress, a chairman of the full committee, going in to be the governor of the state, reelected in that position, being a wonderful leader. And by the way, not to be painted, look, I can say this with some authority, he's not on the left. He was right down the middle in his values and leverage in the debate in the Congress. So he'll be a great, he and Kamala know that we have to govern from the center, and that's where we are.
Maybe there was some truth to that Tim Walz, that Speaker Pelosi knew in the House. But I have a different read of this, Monet, of his tenure as governor, and particularly after Democrats took unified control of the legislature beginning in the 2023 legislative session. It looks like on a whole range of issues, boom, 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 it is pretty solid progressive governance. He signed a law establishing in Minnesota statute that there is a fundamental right to reproductive autonomy for any individual. Republicans objected, among other things, that the word individual did not include any mention of a person's age, so could potentially provide a fundamental right to minors without any parental consent. Here is a press release from March 7th, 2023. Governor Tim Walz signed a bill into law expanding eligibility for a standard Minnesota driver's license by allowing Minnesotans, regardless of immigration status, to obtain a license. An estimated 81,000 undocumented immigrants that says it applies to. And Monet, across a whole host of issues, it looks like he has been a pretty progressive governor for the state of Minnesota. And it's interesting to me that, particularly given Kamala Harris's reputation herself as from the progressive side of the Democratic Party, that she is kind of doubling down on that by picking Mr. Walz.
Well, in addition to that long list of progressive deeds that he did when he gained control of the legislature in 2023, you can add increases to tax rates. Minnesota, I think in a way that would surprise most Americans, has some of the highest taxes in the country. Their top rate on income is 9.85%. He still eliminated deductions for high earners and passed record budget after budget. So really a big spender in addition to some of these other progressive causes. But that seems to be exactly the mandate for Tim Walz, in the sense that, as Kim was describing, he has this folksy appeal. He was a high school football coach. He was in the National Guard himself. He's an active hunter and has a way of speaking that hopefully the progressives believe will get across to a lot of people in these swing states. But his actual governing record is consistent with what the left wants and what the left has demanded. And so that's exactly why you saw Bernie Sanders come out and say that he favored Walz when it was narrowed to a small group of potential candidates for that VP slot. And a lot of other progressives have lined up behind him, because out of all of the contenders, we had Josh Shapiro, of course, who we mentioned, a governor from Pennsylvania, in addition to Mark Kelly from Arizona and Roy Cooper, originally from North Carolina. Walz had the most progressive record and didn't have any issues where he was known to have actually gone against what the progressive base of the Democratic Party sought. So he's going to be walking that tightrope, essentially, trying to maintain his appeal to swing voters, particularly in the upper Midwest states that Kamala Harris needs to win, but also knowing that he's able to talk left and excite and satisfy the progressives who really are calling the shots with regard to the Harris campaign right now.
Hang tight. We'll be right back in one moment. Welcome back. Kim, now the vetting for Tim Walz begins, and to my eye, he has been less of a national figure than some of the other contenders that had been floated as potential running mates for Kamala Harris. And so the media and Republicans, fact checkers, will now take a deep dive into his record. I would point to a July 25 op-ed in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune by a couple people at the Center of the American Experiment. That's a conservative think tank in Minnesota. And they say, first of all, that Walz's record needs to be scrutinized with respect to the riots in 2020 after the killing of George Floyd. They say that as the Twin Cities burned, Walz froze, terrified of upsetting his party's activist base, which sympathized with the rioters. He hesitated to commit the National Guard. They also say that after COVID-19 hit, he shut down schools, churches, businesses, instituted draconian mask mandates and shelter-in-place orders. And I suppose there's more to be said on both of those topics, but these are the kinds of issues that voters will be looking at as they go now to evaluate the record of the person that Kamala Harris wants to bring with her into the Oval Office.
Yeah, there's a great deal there, and I think Republicans are already having a field day. I talked to one operative today who was saying that of all the files they had of all the potential running mates, Walz Walz's was one of their longest. So I think to your point, Kyle, they are pretty happy. He didn't come out of the George Floyd moment well in that he managed to upset pretty much everyone. As noted, he did freeze for a while the city burned before he called in the National Guard. But then again, his decision to call in the National Guard very much infuriated his progressive left. The COVID lockdowns in Minnesota were very draconian. There were some arrests of small business owners, a lot of pushback in the state against those policies. He oversaw, or was in charge, I should say, when a massive fraud unspooled in his State Department of Education over the handling of a federal food program for kids in which it was bilked by fraudsters. There was a lot of criticism for that. There is the mismanagement, I would say, of the state finances. He came in with a very huge surplus, which he's running into a deficit. This despite the fact that he has raised taxes on both individuals and corporations to some of the highest in the country. And this has been gone to pay for a roster of those wish lists of progressive paid family medical leave, sick leave, tax credits for low-income families, and a lot of other an expansion of government health care. He's very much a model of that progressive world vision. And then, fully funding education every year, even though Minnesota, if you dig in, it's got falling literacy rates, falling graduation rates. He's very much in hock to the teachers' unions. He was once a part of the teachers' union. So I think there's going to be a great deal of fun. Climate policies. If people really want to kind of go and dig into, I think Americans are going to learn a great deal more than they ever thought they were going to about Minnesota governance and Tim Walz's view of the world.
Republicans today are also busy circulating quotes from Governor Walz's public remarks, his public record. And this is always something that happens with respect to a new national figure. Democrats have done the same in recent days to J.D. Vance, the vice presidential pick of Donald Trump. That's why we've had these conversations about Vance's remarks on childless cat ladies and so forth. But the flip side of Tim Walz's plain-spokenness, Monet, might be also that he is a guy who tells you what he thinks. And he's been doing that for years now as a member of the House, in the governor's office. And there may be some rich minds to vein there. Here is only one. This is a comment that is getting a lot of attention. This is Tim Walz last week on a White Dudes for Harris call, talking about his advice to Democrats.
Don't ever shy away from our progressive values. One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness. Just do the damn work.
Monet, don't ever shy away from our progressive values. One person's socialism is another person's neighborliness. And we may come to find out that there's a lot more stuff like that in the public record of Tim Walz's remarks.
Yeah, I think a good comparison for Tim Walz would actually be Joe Biden. And I don't mean the Joe Biden of the past 4 years during the absolute pit of his mental decline, but the Joe Biden who was known and loved to some Americans, who shared his progressive values and disliked by others, but always kind of shot from the hip and made some endearing remarks that got him a lot of fans, but also made some really head scratchers. And I think Tim Walz, I've seen another quote that's beginning to circulate recently with regard to the aftermath of those George Floyd riots, where he said that what we've seen over the past few days talking about arson is our city trying to figure out what has transpired and trying to figure out how to heal, which I think is not how most Americans would describe hundreds of buildings being burned down, including a police precinct. But it is revealing of, A, his progressive disposition, not wanting to offend the base of his party during that time, and also his lack of a filter. And so I think that more of these types of controversial quotes are going to be filtering out over the next few days as people start digging into his background.
The other thing fascinating about this choice, Kim, is the long public campaign to get Kamala Harris to choose Tim Walz, or maybe, to put it differently, to not choose Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, who it seemed late last week, into the weekend even, was the favorite to get the VP nod. And there's some pretty compelling logic, I think, just on the politics of it. Josh Shapiro is a popular governor of the state that is probably going to be, or projected to be, a key swing state for the 2024 election in the Electoral College. That's Pennsylvania. Josh Shapiro won re-election in 2022, won that swing state by 15 points. And he has cultivated a reputation as someone who cares more about results than about ideology. energy. There's been lots of talk about his willingness and ability to waive bureaucratic rules after a gas truck caught on fire last year and caused a piece of I-95 interstate to collapse. That Governor Shapiro got involved, and they brought in these NASCAR blowers, and they used some sort of recycled glass to create a temporary roadway, and they opened it up again in 12 days. And that's the kind of persona that he would have brought to the VP ticket, which to my eye would be kind of a balance to Kamala Harris, who is busy hoping that voters forget the fact that 4 years ago she was calling to ban fracking and calling to abolish private health insurance. And what does it say to you, Kim, that in the face of this sustained campaign by people, including Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris didn't do what looks like the politically smart thing, and she did not say, I'm going to pick Josh Shapiro, and some people on the left are going to be mad at me, but I'm going to win more people in the center, people who want to get things done, people who are concerned about Donald Trump, but are also concerned about a super progressive agenda. She decided that she was going to cave into the left instead.
You could argue that what she has spent her time doing this past week or 10 days is not necessarily vetting candidates so much as facing a test as to whether or not she was going to bow to her left or whether or not she was going to do the thing that everyone, just anyone who is looking at this situation understood was probably a smarter call for her campaign. If you look at Pennsylvania, I'm not necessarily one that believes vice presidential candidates can have a massive effect on a campaign. But when we are talking about elections as close as the ones that we have had in recent years, and this one, which looks like it might land straight in the question of Pennsylvania in terms of who ultimately wins those 270 electoral votes. Pennsylvania could be essential. The idea that she would pass over this young, charismatic, very popular in his state, his approval ratings in Pennsylvania are over 60%, also have the opportunity to provide some honest to goodness or more legitimate, as it were, balance to her ticket, especially on the national security front, I think would have just been enormously helpful for her. And instead, the left, it was a vicious campaign against Josh Shapiro. The argument from the progressive left was that he was too pro-Israel, but even some members of the Democratic Party have called out what they feel is a certain anti-Semitic streak running through the party. That is not a good look for Democrats right now. I would note that the same thing happened with another potential valuable running mate, which would have been Mark Kelly, the senator from Arizona. Again, a very crucial swing state. Again, some balance. He was blackballed by the left because he was viewed not to have been all in enough on some major labor legislation, and apparently was persona non grata because he dared to do some bipartisan work on border security. These were all no-goes for the left. And interestingly, for all everyone understood the merits of those two candidates, this still remains a campaign that is terrified of its left and seems super obsessed and focused with making sure their base is energized for the election. And I do appreciate that. But there's always a trade-off. You want your base mobilized, sure, but you can't go so far to the right or to the left that you turn off those swing and centrist voters. And I think that's the risk and the problem she has taken on with this candidate.